1600 KIVA and 93.7 FM. I'm Eddie Aragon, the Rock of Talk, here with another installment here of Life Imagined with Dr. William Summers. Here in the month of December. Happy December. Dr. William Summers, good morning.
Yeah, my gosh, I can't believe it. It's just, winter has arrived.
It has.
Amazing stuff.
But it all stays the same because we continue to take our Life Imagined every single day. We want to live a very long life. Don't forget, folks, you guys can always pick up Memory Revitalizer and Life Imagined at local stores, including Moses Country Store, Duran Central Pharmacy, Sam's Regent Pharmacy, Best Buy Pharmacy, Manal Pharmacy, Evergreen Herbal Market, Village, Apothecary, and Cedar Crest. So,
yeah, Village Apothecary is a very small little store. It's up there next to the Ribs off of Highway 14, and they're really neat gal who actually runs the place, so it's good to plug her a little bit.
Have I ever told you that that's one of my favorite words, apothecary?
Yes.
I sort of feel like when I walk into an apothecary, like everything's just going to get better. I love the Aveda store. I love anything that sells like soaps and, organic stuff like that. But an apothecary is like one of those places where I just feel like I can hang out all day.
Have you ever been to Williamsburg in Virginia?
Yeah, I have. That's so interesting. So we had, oh my God, I can't even believe we're going to get off on this tangent.
Surgery was done in the barber shop. That was where you went for your surgery. But if you wanted medicine, you went to the apothecary, which was basically an herb store.
So Williamsburg, Virginia, I went there 2 times because we spent Easter. We went to the oldest restaurant bar in the entire country, which is just outside of Gettysburg. And then there's
yeah,
it's really interesting. And then there's Emmitsburg. Do you know Emmitsburg, Maryland, where Mount St. Mary's?
Maryland, yeah.
So I did this whole entire tour, and I know that I've actually been to the apothecary. The apothecary when we went there because we stopped and they told us about how everything was basically handled. And, you get the 10-minute introduction and here's what we do here and the mortar pestle, all this kind of stuff. Like, I remember that. And it was just like, that's the, foundation of the country. It just felt like, I don't know. I maybe that's where
in the 1700s, they'd already figured out foxglove was good for dropsy.
Mm-hmm.
Dropsy was their phrase for congestive heart failure. Mm-hmm. What's foxglove? It's digitalis. We use it today.
Mm-hmm.
They had figured out aspirin was good for fever and, that sort of stuff. And they sold it in willow bark and had you chew the willow bark to get your aspirin. So a lot of the old-time things that were available in the Revolutionary War,
we still use them.
We still use them in our own way. We've gussied them up, and they have to, undergo good manufacturing procedures. And it all looks modern and fancy, but it's still foxglove.
So it's really interesting. New Mexico has a long, steeped tradition in homeopathy, homeopathic remedies. There is a book that my Nana had called A Doctor in the House, and it was a pretty thick book, very old, yellowed pages, beautiful, but it had a lot of homeopathic remedies. And she's from a place called Pastura, New Mexico. So you, of course, you live near the mountains and that whole side. And very interesting how people didn't have access to doctors. They didn't have access to kind of any kind of medicine, but they had this book and they knew what, thistle and thyme and all these various other things that they could grow that would kind of remedy.
Yeah, milk thistle, down modulates, inflammatory disease, rheumatoid.
So I would look at everything. So I don't know if you know anything about the author Rodolfo Anaya, right? Bless Me Ultima, and you've ever heard of the word culandera?
Yes, I've heard.
Okay, so culandera is basically like the
herbalists of the day.
There you go. Yeah. So they're
still around.
So that's the whole entire thing. So when you marry homeopathy, apothecary, you look at all these things and you say, well, how did we address health ailments or any of these types of things? Pastura, New Mexico is next to another town where my grandfather was from, which is called Montoya, New Mexico, and the only big city in that entire area. is a place called Tucumcari,
Oh,
which became Old Route 66. So if you start to trace these entire families in western New Mexico and the oil patch and all that kind of stuff, how are they addressing their medical needs? Through the apothecary, through the culandera, through the homeopathy, and through books. They would go bury their dolls, by the way, because they thought if they buried their dolls, they would heal somebody that was in the house that was sick. I mean, just weird stuff. But this is all the types of things that Rodolfo writes about in Bless Me Ultimo and the culandera and that type of thing.
On the other hand, if you believe, that does very nice things. The central nervous system, of course, is in charge of everything.
Programming, positive programming.
Yeah. And so you program positively, your body then down modulates the inflammation, and belief gives you tremendous healing powers.
Miracles.
Yeah.
Right? When we talk about milagros, miracles, right?
Yeah, all you got, if you believe, you're 50% of the way there.
Yeah.
And of course, what we've done is we've shifted that belief to modern medicine, and it really doesn't merit it as much as people give it credit for. I mean, for example, the antibiotics will knock the inflammation in the lungs, let's say, down, but it doesn't really knock it off. What happens is it holds the bacteria down for a couple of days until your immune system responds and wipes out the pneumonia. I mean, most people don't realize it, but if you have pneumonia, you've probably got a 70-80% chance of survival unless you're old and in a nursing facility, in which case it goes the other way. You got a 70% chance of not surviving. But, basically a lot of the modern-day medicines sort of calm down the problem, and then your body does the rest of the healing. So,
belief
that's a basic principle.
Belief is the best tool. And,
exactly.
If you have,
that's one of the reasons when you get a physician, you want to be able to believe in the physician, because then more miracles happen because of the belief. And so, if it means you get rid of that nurse practitioner to get another one you believe in, it's worth the candle. Another quick trick, in this holiday season, the gift that you can give your loved one if they're going to go see a physician or a nurse practitioner is tag along. Because the studies show, beyond the shadow of a doubt, if you have one or two relatives that come with the patient gets better attention, better care. Now, I don't know how that works if the whole family of 500 people show up. Actually, I do know how it works. It's very distracting to the physician and works against you. But as long as one or possibly two people come with the patient gets better care. So that's my holiday tip of the show here.
550-5500 if you want to text in anytime, by the way. And Dr. William Summers has been on the radio station for the last 15 months, and I absolutely love having him here in the Kiva, and glad to have him throughout 2019 as well. A place that I've visited often, and a place that's a very spiritual place, and in fact a place where they also have Kivas is Chaco Canyon.
Yes,
well, let's
indeed.
talk about the Enviro-Wackos and the Chaco Canyon National Historic Park.
Well, it's been it's been on the world list of environmental places since I think the 50s or 60s, so forever. And it's kind of a sacred thing around these parts as well. But I got this crazy email from Crazy Cousin Bobby. She's my quintessential prototype non-thinking, shall we say, socialist, communist, progressive. And Cousin Bobby sends me an email saying, my gosh, you got to give money to the cause to save Chaco Canyon from the terrible oil industry. And unless I send my money to the charity, they were going to drill Chaco Canyon into non-existence. And, of course, anytime I get something from Crazy Cousin Bobby, you got to check into it. So I did. And I found out there was a fraudulent claim. There were a couple of so-called nonprofits, including Solstice Project of Santa Fe, Wild Earth Guardians, Western Environmental Law Off Center, and these groups, and probably a few others at this point, are opposing any oil and gas development within a continent of Chaco Canyon. And what really was going on was the government was offering leases within, say, 10 or 15 miles of the Chaco Cultural National Park, not actually in the park itself. And what they were claiming was, well, it may not be in the park, but when you drill, you're going to destroy these special sacred trails from one pueblo to another, and you're going to irreparably damage things. And a person who was leading that was an instructor, Richard Friedman, at San Juan College in Farmington, who had developed a laser pulse sent from an airplane to look at landscape features. But the point was the BLM wanted to start licensing for development, and this was with the Trump administration. And the development, according to BLM, and the judge bought this, Judge Browning, I should say, was that each site had to pass a specific survey for cultural significance before the drilling could start. And that these sites would just sit there untouched on Navajo land unless the parcel was leased and development began, at which point in time you would carefully scour the site looking for any evidence of previous culture. Well, that argument carried the day last May by Judge James Browning, who sided with the BLM. And this is a new year. We now have a governor who is basically seems to be committed to blocking any development of oil and gas. We've been identified as having the highest emissions of the various states that are major oil and gas producers. And we have a Democrat, liberal progressive,
Liberal progressive. It's just straight progressive.
Yeah, just straight out progressive group up there in the Mary Roundhouse. And so I'm saying, watch this. You're going to see the activists really tune up. You're going to see oil production drop. You're going to see them block the feds. You're going to see revenues to the permanent fund go down. And always remember the technique of the communists, the deceivers, is to find causes that suck weak-minded people into their route to absolute power. And this is going to be fake science, fake news, phony promises, and the people who are touting it are what Lenin called useful idiots. Do not believe the hype when it comes. If anybody has spare time, and of course those of us who seem to be more knowledgeable about this, who understand that water has gotten at probably 500 feet. You don't even start fracking until you get below a mile, which is more than 5,000 feet. So you're not interrupting water tables or anything else, and all this hoo-whack about earthquakes is a bunch of baloney. It's all fake science. But we're going to be suffering with it because we chose strange leaders.
Yeah, well, we continue to do it, and a lot of that, our mind is molded from the local news and the local news media, which, of course, is, as we said before, progressive. That's the direction that they're pushing us in. So the input equals the outputs, Dr. Summers, and that's what we ultimately get when we go to the election. 550-5500 if you want to text in anytime. Dr. Summers, we imitate nature, or does nature imitate us? Which is it?
You know, most
is it wait? Is it art imitates life, or life imitates art? Sort of saying the same thing, right?
Yeah, you know, it's basically, you just can't, when you get down to the way people behave and what people do, it's hard to keep up with nature, and vice versa. We have the stealth bomber, and we have the stealth fighter jet, and other stealth planes, and we think we really invented something. This is really fantastic. We can, not be seen on radar. But now enter the recent research that came out in the proceedings of the National Academy of Science. The research has been done on the lowly little beast called the cabbage tree emperor moth, or in Latin, that would be Bonita alcinoi. Bonita alcinoi. And it's a favorite snack of bats. It's a palm-sized, awkwardly flying insect that has many disadvantages. For example, it's big. It's easy to spot, especially when you've got radar, which bats have. It's slow-moving. It's non-toxic. Oh, that's a cute thing. A lot of butterflies are totally toxic. You know, those beautiful iridescent colors in the butterflies? Those are neurotoxins as bad as a rattlesnake bite. Anyway, and the real telling thing about the cabbage tree emperor moth is it's deaf. It can't even hear the bat coming in on it. But the good Lord didn't leave the old moth defenseless. Turns out it's a stealth bomber. So this study that was done in the Imperial College in London showed 3D nanostructures of the single scale on a moth's wing. And when they looked at a 3D nanostructure, they found that it resonated to 3 different frequencies because of the pattern, the holes in it, and it could basically take those 3 frequencies, which span the range of the bats using an echolocation, and totally confuse the bat. So I guess the take-home message here is, whenever possible, imitate nature. And nature was doing things that we have yet to discover long before we get around to it. So imitate nature as best you can. Then ask why later, or perhaps ask how later. But don't ask, why is nature doing this, and you don't start doing it until you get to the why and the how. Just, take back to the initial example, take your foxglove because Mother Nature put it there, and your dropsy or your heart attack or your, heart failure gets better. Now, this is what we've done with the Life Imagine and Memory Revitalizer formula. We basically looked at nature and said, how does nature combat oxidative injury? And we found there were 5 different classes of injury done. And so what we did was we put examples of things that reversed those 5 different classes. And therefore we get pretty much the big bang out of the revitalizer in terms of improvement in your health. So I wanted to use this moth story to plug our product, and I think it's a good example.
Yeah, absolutely. 550-500. Let's talk about something that we hear about. Is it not PC to say third world, Dr. Summers?
Oh, yes. Well, that's...
Right. We can't say third world.
No,
right?
we're third world. We're the third world.
Let's talk about malaria. Mm-hmm. Right? Is it a world-class killer?
It is a world-class killer.
Are we going to be able to kill it?
Well, there has been just a touch of progress, but, again, in 2016, there were 216 million cases of malaria worldwide, resulting in an estimated between 500,000 and 750,000 deaths. Now, about 90% of both the cases that occurred and the deaths are in Africa. And I think that's where Bill Gates is trying to put some money to do something about it. And the rates of malaria have decreased between 2000 and 2015 by about 37%. Now, malaria is commonly associated with poverty and has major negative effects on economic development. I mean, who wants to go to Africa and catch malaria? But the real cure is something that we've talked about on the show before. And remember when we identified Rachel Carson as the largest mass killer of the 20th century?
That's right.
And she's credited with over 500 million deaths. That's more than Stalin. That's more than Mao. That's more than Hitler combined. And, of course, what did Rachel Carson do? Well, Rachel Carson wrote this book, Silent Spring, and then presented it as real science, and it was fake science. And, essentially outlawed DDT. And DDT is so darn innocuous, you could bathe in this stuff. The funny thing is, after they got their political win, and we would give money to African dictatorships if they would ban DDT, what happened was the malaria rates went up almost instantly. And then when the government finally got through studying, it was very clear that DDT was totally benign. But it didn't matter because they had already gotten it stigmatized. And I think it's time we bring back DDT. And we could really impact these hundreds of thousands of deaths every year in Africa. But This is the modern day. This is a new century. We have to do it in a nuanced way. So I wanted to point out that Zhang et al. Have now identified the full set of 5,380 malaria parasite genes.
Wow.
And of these 5,380 genes, 2,680 genes are called essential malaria genes. In other words, the malaria doesn't exist if you mess with those genes. But of those, only 10%, or 268 genes, are so-called high-value targets for drug development. So this paper has now identified the 268 genes which are likely to give a drug that might be as curative of malaria. Seems like the most likely target is in what's called the proteasome degradation pathway. Anyway.
Wow, that's a mouthful.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately we may replace DDT. Progress is being made. I think that's the point of this story. And the other point of the story is always trust in human innovation to solve problems and shortages. Remember, Thomas Malthus came out with a book predicting that the world could not contain more than 100 million people. Well, we passed that so long ago. And why are we still here if Thomas Malthus was correct? The planet would explode if we got above 100 million people. And the answer is human innovation. And so even though we have now blocked off the DDT for political reasons, the human mind is so innovative, it will solve the problem eventually. In the meantime, take your memory revitalizer so you're healthy enough to be around when we discover the answer to malaria, and you can celebrate and say you were following the quest on our program here. Anyway, wonders
Let's
of
talk
nature.
about more wonders of nature. We've got a lot to get to.
Yeah,
Dr. Summers, I love having you here in the Kiva. You've always got so many stats. You seem to you can't get off of Rachel Carson.
Oh,
I mean,
she really was a horrible human being, and the problem is she's worshipped as almost a saint by the progressives. And it makes me think that they're a death cult. I mean, they love death and they love offing people, and I mean, they're big supporters of the ideas of the progressives of the 1890s, which was there are certain defective people, and we need to get them off the planet. Well, how we do that is we pay for their abortions, and that idea was very much loved by Adolf Hitler.
yeah.
It's those early roots of progressivism. They were much more open about what they were about, and that's why they get rejected. And they changed their name to liberals at a later time under Franklin Roosevelt.
Yeah. This week I just want to mention one quick topic that came out from the Catholic Church, and I know Langston and I talked about it on the program, The Rock of Talk, and the Archdiocese this week filed for bankruptcy protection because they want to protect themselves from the sexual maladies, if you will, or whatever happened within their church, the documents that are there. And, of course, we've seen what's happened in Pennsylvania, in Texas now. I mean, this is something that has been very pervasive and covered up within the Catholic Church. It's one of the reasons why they continue to lose membership. And I have to talk about the Catholic Church and their inability to defend the fact that we are one of 7 states here in this country that has late-term abortions. We have 4,500 abortions every single year here in the state of New Mexico, and the third trimester abortions were one of the capitals of the world in terms of performing those. And the Catholic Church has been absolutely deafening silent on that, and it's been disgusting to me. Yet at the very same time, they continue to advocate for open borders, illegal immigrants, and give us a tired, you're poor, you're hungry, in terms of the pre-1912, bring us to Ellis Island. And what they don't understand in all of this is they have pushed out the real Christian conservative viewpoints within their church, and I think that has helped build the large congregations that have been happening in a lot of the evangelical places here in the city of Albuquerque, and of course throughout the rest of the state. So when I look at
the
this,
evangelicals are openly opposed to abortion.
yeah, and
pro-life,
but we don't hear anything at all from the Catholic Church. So I'd like for you to kind of just take a pause here and talk about this.
Yeah, the position of the devil is to beware, as close to the altar as he can get. So if the position of the devil is to be as close to the altar as he can get, I think that pretty much explains the pedophile priests.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is if the leadership does not lice these people out, open them up, and expose them, as the Bible says you're supposed to do, you get a permissive, shall we say, progressive attitude, political attitude within the church.
Mm-hmm.
And so what you see in the modern-day Catholic Church in many places is something that's not a heck of a lot different than the Democrat Party.
Mm-hmm.
As a matter of fact, Colleen and I went to some sort of church function. It was actually I think it was a Presbyterian or a Methodist church, traditional type of non-Catholic church. And they were organizing. They were having a thing they were going to debate. Well, there was no debate in that place. What was organizing people to go block ICE agents when they would try to pick up people here in Santa Fe out of the prisons. It was, so the church has been co-opted in many different ways. And I think that's sad. But what it means is we're having a reformation. The church will reform around basic principles that have been around since the beginning of time. And we're beginning to see some legislature that will once again say, look, life begins with, a discernible heartbeat. And I think that's true. Not with, did the baby survive the womb?
Yeah.
It's really pathetic.
Let's talk about...
But you're going to get me in trouble here.
No, I'm never going to get you in trouble. Only you could get yourself in trouble.
Yeah, I do that plenty well.
You don't do a good job of that, but we will talk about that maybe just a little bit later in the show. More wonders of nature. What are something called statoliths?
Well, take a look at this picture and tell me what's wrong with it.
The bean sprout is angled upwards. That's growing out of the soil.
That's right. So they tip the pot over on its side and then let the plant grow. And what did the plant do? Well, it decided to, grow upright, even though the plant is in the pot that's been turned on its side. How does that happen? Well, that was studied by two French universities, an elegant proof indeed. That's, again, in the proceeds of the National Academy of Science this last May. And there are particular cells that are called stratocytes. And these cells involve what are called, boy, I'm going to kill this, gravitropic perception.
Oh, my gosh.
So plants actually have cells that float around that can tell you which way is up. That's amazing. What they have is little particles that are filled with starch-like organelles. And the starch-like organelles have a sediment in the lowest part of the cell that initiates differential growth patterns and basically always tells the plant which way is up. So it knows to grow up. You can, and in the proofs in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences, they went through, it isn't the sunlight, it isn't the air, it isn't a whole bunch of other factors that might influence the plant to grow up. It's these little cells that have this these little fat-like particles in them. And they're actually amyloidoplastic organelles. You remember amyloid is, of course, blamed for Alzheimer's disease. But it turns out it's a useful general protein, and the body uses in different ways. And this is a way in which amyloid is used to register gravity, which then is used to tell the plant which way to grow, which way is up. It's astonishing. The world is really an amazing place, and nature is amazing, too. And frankly, you've got to toss in a plug at the end of each one of these. Life Imagine.
Let me do it. I'll handle this. Where we want you to get your Memory Vitalizer and your Life Imagine. You can get it at local stores, including Moses Country Stores, Duran Central Pharmacy, Sam's Regent Pharmacy, Best Buy Pharmacy, Manal Pharmacy. Where's that located, Dr. Summers?
Well, it's on Manal, of course.
And Evergreen Herbal Market, Village Apothecary, best word in the world, or online at MemoryVitalizer.com. That's MemoryVitalizer.com or Amazon.com. Yes, you can pay Jeff Bezos to get your Memory Vitalizer, or dial directly at 800-606-0192. That's 800-606-0192. Let's travel a little more further afield. And what is the Hiawatha Crater? And Why is it, or how is it related to climate change? When I think of Hiawatha, I think of a cartoon that Bugs Bunny did, back in the 60s and the 70s. And he was talking about Hiawatha and how he was. What is this Hiawatha Glacier?
The Hiawatha crater underneath the Hiawatha Glacier, which is in the northwesternmost part of Greenland. And let me start.
It's actually one of the places. I want to go to like 3 places in this world. One is Greenland, one is Iceland, and one is like Denmark, Sweden, Norway. Those are like all the places I want to attend or go. Or Glasgow as well.
Glasgow's interesting. It's sort of a dull little town. But if you're going to do that, go over the other side of Scotland and go to Loch Ness. It's an amazing, magical place. But anyway, that's where Nessie, the Loch Ness Monster, is supposed to be. But so back to your 3 choices of Denmark, Iceland, and Greenland. 2 of them are in this story.
Oh, wow.
And
okay.
The story starts about 12,800 years ago. Look at your clock. Make sure we got that right. Yeah, 12,800 years ago.
I calculated the flux capacitor, and it looks like that's exactly
That's right. Okay. Yeah, right. Right. The TARDIS is in the right place. And so anyway, the Ice Age was coming to an end, but in parts of the northern hemisphere, suddenly temperatures plunged 8 degrees centigrade. That's about 15 degrees Fahrenheit. And it stayed that way for a mere 1,000 years. And strangely enough, 12,800 years ago, we had no automobiles. The dinosaurs were gone. And, elsewhere in the world, the forests were pushing back the tundra. But from 12,800 years ago, the northern hemisphere, the forests were receding and the tundras were advancing. Megafaunas vanished across North America, as did the Clovis man who was hunting them. And you can see that in the La Brea tar pits out in L.A. I mean, the saber-toothed tigers, the mastodons, those guys all froze with the daisies in their tummies. Anyway, that era is called the Junge Dryas. Now, why? What happened? Was it a change in the ocean currents? It wasn't the sun, because it was local to the northern hemisphere. If the sun had changed, the entire planet would have changed, Mars would have changed, Venus would have changed. Could it have been a meteorite? Well, that's one of the major hypotheses. All right, let's fast forward to the year 2015 or so.
Okay.
And a Dane by the name of Kurt Kjær, he was a geologist at the National History Museum in Denmark, in Copenhagen. Actually pronounced it right, Copenhagen. Yeah, so he was studying a new map from NASA showing the hidden contours under Greenland's ice developed by satellite imaging. And what he saw was a hole underneath the Hiawatha Glacier. I have no idea why it was named Hiawatha, but which was, I think, from a poem of Longfellow's poem. Anyway, it was in the far northwestern corner of Greenland, and it was a hole very characteristic of a meteor type of crater. Now, Kjær, who was aware of the Junge Dryas mystery of what suddenly caused this ice age in the northern side of the globe, recalled a massive iron meteorite in his museum's courtyard. And he parked his bicycle right next to this 20-ton rock of iron that was called, and I'm going to butcher this one, Agpikalak.
Agpikalak.
Yeah, and it's Eskimo for the man. Now, this rock was discovered actually by Western explorers in far northwestern Greenland, about where we have an Air Force base. And it was the source of iron for the Eskimos for their harpoon tips and the tools that they used back into the mists of times of the Inuit people. And somehow or another, our explorers didn't respect the Inuits, and they just grabbed onto this 20-ton piece of rock and brought it home.
Does anybody ever respect the Inuits?
I don't know. The poor babies, and they're the only people I know that eat a 6,000 calorie a day diet and they lose weight. But then that diet consists of whale blubber.
Takes a lot to stay warm.
Yeah, it takes a lot to stay warm. And it's whale blubber for breakfast, whale blubber for dinner, whale blubber for lunch, and then seal blubber for dessert. And so you eat a 90% fat diet, you actually lose weight. And they're remarkably healthy, no diabetes, none of that stuff. Anyway, so Kerdjar was curious. He had this rock in front of his institute, and he had this little map showing a meteor crater in northwestern Greenland, and both of them came from the same area. And he noticed the German group had some ice-penetrating radar that they could mount onto airplane wings. And so he got the funding for the German group to fly over his suspected meteorite crater. And there was a twin-engine DC-3 World War II vintage. Amazing. Those things are still in the air.
Yeah, they are.
Anyway, so it took 3 flights over the potential meteorite in May of 2016. And the data collected continued to suggest it was a meteorite crater that was about, I think it was 50 yards, 50 yards high at the bottom, so that could have been the meteor. And the glacier's age had to be less than 100,000 years old, okay? Couldn't be more than 100,000 years old because it hadn't, been worn away by time. So Kerdjar then went to the glacier edges. He sampled rocks all along the crescent of the edge of the glacier. The most important part was right in the center where there was a river that was coming out from the middle of the glacier. And the river actually would be melt coming from the glacier downward underneath the glacier and popping out as it came into the ocean. And what he found when he looked at the sediments coming out of this river, it was totally consistent with a huge meteorite. And with everything else that they had from the radar, it looked like about a 1.5 kilometer meteorite by the time it got to Earth, which means it was maybe 10 kilometers or something like that coming into the atmosphere. And it had to be much less than 100,000 years ago, could perhaps have landed 12,800 years ago, or a magic number. They found grains of glass forged in the river. It had to be forged at temperatures higher than volcanic eruption, and the only place where these kinds of temperatures occur is when there's been extraterrestrial meteorites hitting. Indeed, the estimate of the crater size at the present time is greater than the city of Washington, D.C.
Wow.
So if we ever need to do something with the politicians, we just put them under the glacier and maybe things get better.
This is astonishing.
Yeah.
Just when we think we have an impact on things like climate change, you run across some sort of humbling facts, Dr. Summers, on things that really do cause actual climate change.
Let's look at what this represents. This represents 700 megaton nuclear bombs landing once, like that. And that would be enough to ignite wildfires across 2 to 3 continents that were nearby Greenland. It would be all of North America would turn into flames, as would be the Russian steppes, etc. And that could explain the sudden loss of saber-toothed tigers and woolly mammoths, and the fact that the mankind running around those days basically went extinct. And everything dropped by 15 degrees for 1,000 years. Now that's real climate change.
Yeah, that's
and the humbling part is we think we're going to do it with an automobile. I don't think so.
An extinction level event, and the automobiles are certainly not that. Especially with, did you see all the big layoffs this week that Donald Trump essentially got blamed for at the United Auto Workers and the GM plant?
No. GM stands for Government Motors.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, remember Obama did
every single person who took those bailout funds back in 2008 and 2009, and by the way, that were implemented in 2011, they were implemented by Barack Obama.
Exactly.
He's the one who went back over there, and he basically advocated, said, why don't you start laying off some of these people? We'll create some disruption, because we need to win Michigan, and we need to win Ohio. We need to win all the different plants where we're going to have layoffs between now and then. That's what this whole thing is focused on. It's eventually focused on taking back power.
And notice GM has not dropped any plants in China or Mexico.
I noticed that, yeah.
No, but they're dropping the ones in the United States. But again, I think that's more of a deep state type problem than a Donald Trump problem. Because you have the government fighting within itself. You have the proponents of the deep state, and then you have Donald Trump. And, another example is this climate change report that came out. That's very clearly a deep state event. That wasn't really Donald Trump. There were some leftovers from the previous administration that are busy trying to exert chaos.
Let's take the last few minutes to discuss an issue that you're facing. And it's very interesting because you're an individual entrepreneur. You graduated from the best psychiatric educational institution in the country in Washington, University in St. Louis. I mean, you are now facing some interesting, what would you say? I'm not going to say charges, but some interesting information coming from the federal government in regards to your memory revitalizer. And I just want to talk about that because we're also very careful about how we talk about the product and what it can do. And you've always been mindful of it, been very careful in terms of stepping over things. We've never made a claim here on this radio station on FCC regulated airwaves where you've suggested that it is a cure-all for this or that or anything like that. But we have said that it has aided patients such as this type of person.
Yeah.
And I think we have to be very careful in terms of how we address that. But now you're, based upon a couple of trips and some of the information that you have released, have come into the crosshairs of the federal government.
Well, I mean, we gave a major speech back in the 1st of October to the American Association of Physicians and Surgeons. And frequently at these kinds of meetings, the FDA will send agents to listen in and make assessments. And so we recently got a little thing saying that they had looked at our website, and by golly, we had made claims that were inconsistent with being registered as a health supplement and were more consistent with being a pharmaceutical. And there are very clear guidelines on those types of things. You know, every bottle that you see in the health food store is going to have a label on it that says these claims have not been assessed by the FDA, and then the next statement will be this product is not intended to diagnose, treat, or prevent any known illness. So when we talk about things, we'll talk about cellular health. We won't talk about cancer. Mm-hmm. When we talk about things, we'll talk about anti-aging, antioxidant type things. We won't talk about some of the scourges that come with aging, such as arthritis of various types. And we won't talk about Alzheimer's disease. And this product, we cannot say, treats Alzheimer's disease. Now, what we can do is present cases of people who seem to have improved their memory, and they may have had Alzheimer's, but we're not saying that it treated the Alzheimer's. So the FDA, we've always been very careful about this as far as I know, but the FDA apparently went to our websites, and somehow or another they saw that we were making such claims. So we will be sending them a little response saying... a
little information.
Yeah, and then basically that we've reviewed and we've looked very carefully at each page of the website, and we... there, at the present time is nothing there. So they can think that we changed something, but quite frankly, we don't have to change a thing. We've been aware of this all the time. So
because we don't want to change a
right
thing.
Now.
It's a product that has been helping many people, including myself, and that, of course, is Memory Revitalizer and Life Imagine. You can pick it up at local stores, including Moses Country Stores, Duran Central Pharmacy, Sam's Region Pharmacy, Best Buy Pharmacy, Manal Pharmacy, Evergreen Herbal Market, and the Village Apothecary now in Cedar Crest, or online at memoryrevitalizer.com or amazon.com. You can also dial direct at 800-606-0192. That's 800-606-0192. Any final words, Dr. Summers?
Nope, stay healthy. It's Christmas, so please stay healthy and
do whatever you can.
And the thing is, I don't know. Normally we don't advertise in December because we just didn't view our product as something to be. But it's a great stocking stuffer, folks. So there you go. Put a Memory Revitalizer bottle in the stocking of your best friend or your kids or
somebody
anybody
that you want to see live.
That's right.
550-5500. Text anytime, Dr. William Summers. We'll see you again, same time, same place, right here in the Kiva on AM 1600 KIVA, 93.7 FM. the web, the app, abqradio.com.